All right, Swiftmeisters, we are going to sharpen your skills as a full stack developer by going through some of the exercises in Gallagher.com/Swift 9.3, the ones associated with the Snacktacular app. So what we're going to be doing here is reapplying some of the things that we learned in Snacktacular to make sure that you know some of the techniques to be able to build your own full stack social apps using Google Firebase and Cloud Firestore and some other tools. So we're going to build this app out in a bunch of different sections. We're going to do 9.3 first. At the end, our app is going to look just like this. So here are the steps that we're going to go through. Let's get at it. One of the things that I hope that you find useful in our online book is that it'll actually take you through step by step and show you how to set things up. So whenever you want to go ahead and recreate an app that has the features that we've learned, you can just go through, and again, there are diagrams up here that are labeled and things that you can take through step by step. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to prepare our app for Cloud Firestore, and we're going to create a Firestore app too. So the first thing that I'm going to do actually before I do any of this stuff is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create an app, and we're going to call this app Hackathon. So let's create this hackathon app. And again, this is just going to be an app that allows people to sign up for our university's hackathon from different universities all over the country. So I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to call this project Hackathon, save it right to the desktop. And the reason that I create my project first is now I've got a place that I can go ahead and set up my CocoaPods. So now that my app is up, I'm going to quit back out of it. I'm going to double click into the Hackathon folder. So that's the first layer of the folder here. I'm going to open up Terminal. And again, the steps that you do when you install CocoaPods is the first thing that you've got to do is change directory to the directory that holds your project. So I'd go in here into Terminal and do cd space, which is change directory. I drag over my folder and notice that it puts the path name right after the space. Press enter here and this should bring you exactly, notice it says Hackathon here, this is our Hackathon folder. And then if we say pod init, what we've done is we've created a pod file. Now that we've created that pod file here, I'm going to open the pod file up in Xcode. And this is just a quick reminder of what your pod file should look like. It's always a good idea to visit the documentation, but we're going to be using Google Places autocomplete, so we need these three files here, or these three pod install lines here. We're going to be using Firebase, as well as Cloud Firestore and Firebase Storage, plus their UI, and we'll also use SD Web Image. And these names, sometimes they'll change. So for example, when I started working with this product, it used to be called Firebase Auth UI. Now it's just Firebase UI. So it's not a bad idea, but it doesn't look like anything other than SD Web Image has a version number in there. So that's great. You'll also notice that my iOS platform is set to be 11. So this wouldn't work on anything, on any device that didn't have at least iOS 11 installed on it. So now I'm going to hop over and I've got my pod file here. I'm just going to replace this with what I've got. Again, the indentation isn't super important here, but I'm going ahead and just indenting it so that it looks pretty much like what you'll see in your documentation. I'm going to do Command S, quit out of Xcode, and then do pod install. And you should see this chug away, and it'll install all of your pod files. And once that's ready to go, then you can just get into your project using the XC workspace file. Again, you want to start ignoring, now that we have installed CocoaPods, the XC proj, and use XP workspace. And now that my pod files have been installed, everything is looking good. I can just open up XC workspace to make sure everything is fine. And in fact, well, I'll leave this open. One of the first things that we're going to need as we set up our project is Firebase is going to be asking us what the bundle ID is. And you'll notice that I've just expanded all my files. Everything is looking good here. I've opened up the Hackathon folder. And if you click right here on your project information icon under targets, you'll see that the bundle identifier is here. It's probably com dot whatever your team name is .hackathon. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually head over on the web to firebase.google.com. Assuming that everybody's logged in and you've got an account. So I'm going to go to my console, and this is where I'm going to create a new app. So there'll be a plus sign right here that allows me to create a new app, and I'll click on this, and my awesome project is going to be called Hackathon. You might have seen that there was another there, but I deleted it. I'm going to accept the terms of service, create the project. Google will swirl around here. It might take a little bit of time, but the project will be created. Again, what this is doing is it's setting up a project called Hackathon on Google Cloud's Firestore for my user ID. And the project is ready, so I'll click on Continue. And now I can set this up, and since I'm working on iOS, I'm going to click on iOS. It asks me for that bundle ID. Again, we just grabbed that out of this particular bundle identifier field here. inside of our project information. So I'm going to paste that right in. You don't need to give it a nickname, but I'm going to call it Hackathon, and we can ignore the App Store ID, and we'll click on register. Now, you see this file here that says download Google Services info.plist. This is a really important file, so we're going to click on download here. You want to make sure that when you download the name so that there's no number afterward. Some folks might have their browser set up so that it is going to save it to the downloads folder, and if you have a bunch of these in the downloads folder, sometimes what it does is it adds like a parentheses #1 afterward. You want to make sure that it doesn't do that. It actually has to be called Google Services-info like this. I'm going to save it right into my Hackathon folder here. Click on save. And then the instructions are right here so we can continue to follow them. But what I'm going to do now that I've saved that is I'm going to grab on the Google plist that I've got, hold down my mouse, drag over, get back into Xcode, and I usually slide this right underneath where it says info.plist, and I'm going to click on finish there, and I put the Google file in. Now again, Google will take you through these things step by step as well. We've already set our pod files up, so we don't need to worry about that. And you know, again, I do them first so that I can go ahead and add the info.plist as soon as I create it. And then it's going to ask you to do some other things for authentication and setup here. So we'll go into the appdelegate.swift, and it wants us to make sure that we've imported Firebase. So we'll go ahead and do that. By the way, if you just click on this line, notice that it says copied, which is a nice feature for Google's website. So I'm going to click on appdelegate.swift, just paste in import Firebase, and then they also want us to do this Firebase config. It's in this first function here just before our return true, so right underneath this override point comment that comes in here. So now I've done all of the configuration that is mentioned here. Now it says run your app to verify installation. I find that it usually hangs here, but the app works fine, so I'm just going to go ahead and say quit this step and go through. Now, there are a few other things that we need to do for our app before we can get up and running. I'm going to hop back over here, and I'm going to get into my Google info.plist inside of Xcode. And now in here, you see this thing that says revised _client_ID. We actually need to set this up and put it in our project information here. So again, I'm in Google plist. I'm going to double click here so that I'm highlighting all of the information that's in this particular text field. So you want to make sure that that's what you're selecting, not the whole line, but the text inside of the text field. If you selected the whole line, it would show up in XML, and when you pasted it in, it would start with a less than symbol. That's not what we want. We want it to start with this COM thing that we have right here. Then we're going to go over into the project information right here on the top, this blue icon. And what I want us to do is to click on, again, we're in targets, click on info. And then if we go down to info, you'll see something says URL types in here. Again, this is something we do whenever we set up a Google Firestore application, Firebase application. That app is on the web now. We're going to click on plus here. For URL schemes, we're going to paste in what we just copied from Google. Again, we can see it starts with com.google, so that's all looking good. And we've set this up so our app is going to be ready to go. Now, some other things that we typically do as well when we get set up here is we click on authentication, and we can set our sign-in method. Now, the sign-in method that we're going to be using here is going to be for Google, so I'm going to enable Google sign-in right here as well. We don't need to worry about this information for project support in email, but if you wanted to add one, you could go ahead and do that. By the way, I never answer this email, my Gmail email, so don't try to contact me on those. You won't get a follow-up. And now that I'm set here, so I've set that users can go ahead and log in. We've got our sign-in method that's all set up. We've got no users here right now, but we'll see that this will change in our app, and that's looking good. Now, the next steps that we need to do are steps that are associated with getting the code set up so that we can use Firebase login. I'm back in 9.3, and again, these are the different steps that you'll see when going ahead and installing. I've just walked you through these steps as well. Now, unfortunately, the Google documentation for using their authentication UI, which is this nice little UI that shows up and allows the user to log in, isn't super great. But we're going to be able to leverage the code that we've listed right here. And again, this is going to be highly repeatable code. So if you ever have a situation where you're using a table view and you want the user to log in, you can leverage what we've created here. Now notice the steps that I've got that are set up here too, but I've also got a GitHub gist right underneath where you can actually copy and paste some of the stuff that we've got. And it's described up here, so certainly, you know, we're going to have a different class name that we've got in here, and we're going to have different classes that we have here as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up our gist file here, and it looks like I need to have all of these things that are imported into our view controller. So I'm going to hop back over to the web and click on my first my main storyboard. I do that because one of the things that I'd suggested here in the instructions for this project are to rename the view controller as Teams List View Controller. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And you know, by the way, if we go back into the book, of course, we can see all the stuff down in the bottom that will take you through these things step by step. So I just had that stuff up on a previous slide. So we're going to hop over and we see our view controller here. I actually always like to develop on the kind of iPhone that I own. So I'm going to select this model right here, and I've got a notch. And I'm going to click on where it says viewcontroller.swift, and actually I'm going to go in here and double click inside where it says class view controller, right click and select refactor, rename, and we are going to call this the Teams list view controller. Now when I refactor and rename, notice that it's changing everything, so it goes ahead and changes the list view that I've got, or the file name that I've got up here. The one thing actually that it doesn't change is the name inside of the comment. But if I just put in Teams List View Controller up here, if you really want to be consistent with your comments, you can go ahead and do that. I usually check over on the main storyboard just to make sure that this is set up and its identity is set up in the identity inspector, and it is. Notice that it rechanged the name here too, so all of this is looking great. Now, I remember I copied some information that we had up in our gist. That's the stuff that's right in here. And so the first thing that I'm going to put in here is going to be this set of import statements right under the import UI kit. So I'm going to press enter here, and those are all the things that I'm going to be working with. I'm not working with core location right away, but I eventually will. Firebase UI gives us this pre-built UI from Firebase. We'll configure it a little bit, and we're going to be specifically using the Google sign-in piece for that. Now, if we go back over here as well, you know, again, we've got a different class name, so you don't want to copy the whole thing in here. You know, just for now, before we actually go ahead and create the different team names, why don't we just set up some teams with some bogus names in a string array, and this will allow us to set everything up on our table view. Now notice we've also got these other things in here which we definitely want to do as well, so we're going to grab these two authentication lines that are inside of view did load. So I'm going to copy those, I'm going to paste those in, and again, this is the kind of thing that you're going to need anytime you use Firebase authentication. We're going to get some errors here right away because we haven't set up an extension with the appropriate protocol and required methods. We'll get to that in just a bit. And then we've also got some stuff in here for our table view, and we hide the table view right away. It's just a little security piece that we put in. This makes sure if a new user logs in and they haven't logged in, that they're not going to see any of the old data that they're not authorized to see in there. It's just a technique that you could use. There's some more secure techniques you can also set up, but this is using something that we already know how to do. It's really simple. So this uses a table view. We'll go and why don't we go ahead and actually create the table view before we forget about it, and then we'll finish the Firebase code. So if we're going to put in some data in here, I'd mentioned let's go ahead and create var teams, and this is going to hold our teams, and we'll just say for now, how about Boston College, Georgia Tech, Gonzaga University, Smith College, just so that we've got a few teams that are in here. And before we get too far ahead of ourselves, this is just the same text for exercise 9.3. So we've renamed our table view controller. Let's embed it in a navigation controller, then add the table view and the table view cell. So hop over here and click on main storyboard and click on our doc and the yellow item in the doc editor, embed in navigation controller, and we've got this set up. Feel free to rearrange if you'd like. And next up, we're going to be putting some things into our user interface. Again, we can just check on the slide here. We want to add table view cell. We want to use the cell identifier as team cell, and then select the selection to none so that we're not going to have any of the grayed out there. And we'll add constraints. So I'm going to option click on top of my library, and I'm going to type in here for my object library and grab in my table view and drag it over. And you can resize it if you want, but we're going to set constraints in just a second. I'm going to drag my table view over, my table view cell, I'm sorry, put it inside of the table view. If I take a look at the object attributes for that cell, again, you want to really make sure that you've clicked in the cell itself. And if it's not showing up, you can just show in your object library here. Again, I was in the content view, so I want to do table view cell. Make sure that the attribute that shows up here is table view cell. And I'm going to say that this is called team cell. That's the identifier that was listed in the instructions. I'm going to click back on my table view. I'm going to set my constraints, and those constraints are going to be as 0, 0, 0, 0. Make sure that you've got all 4 lines highlighted in red. Add those 4 constraints. And then back in our instructions, we set up a bar button item called a sign out bar, which will be listed there. We should create an action that says sign out pressed. Now, bar button items are called bar button items, and we want to have this one that's just named item. We want to drag it over, let go. This is going to have text inside of it. It's going to be custom, and instead of saying item, it's going to say sign out like this. And we are also going to create IB outlets that are necessary. So I'm going to go back and click on time list view controller.swift, option click on main storyboard so that I'm in the assistant editor here, give myself a little bit more space. I'm going to create an IB outlet for the table view. So I'm going to control click on the table view and drag over and call this, as we normally do, table view in lower camel case with a capital V but a lowercase t. I am going to go down now and create, just before the end of this class, an IB action for sign out, which is going to be sign out pressed. I'll set the type to UI bar button item and connect so that that's installed. And if we take a look, we also want to add an add bar button item here up to the top. We've got a string array named teams, and then we want to do all of the steps necessary for the table view. We've also want to in view did load set the table views property to is hidden. So let's go ahead and do that first, since we've got this up here. So I'm clicking on the table view here. One thing that we didn't do is I'm going to click back on the cell. I said to select the cell selection to none. Again, this won't have any of the lingering gray selections when we click on a particular item. If we click over here back on the table view, we're going to set the is hidden property, and you have to scroll down a bit to find it, but it's in the view area, again, in the attributes of not the cell, but the table view itself, and click on is hidden. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to unhide that when we've gone ahead and logged in. We also want to add one other bar button item here. I'm going to drag this over to the right-hand side, let go, and I am going to have this as a system button, and it's going to be system item add, and we can see that that changes to a plus sign. Now I should be done with everything on my main storyboard, so I'm going to get rid of that and get back into our standard editor here. And I'm going to go ahead and type in all of the code that I typically need to type in to get a table view working. Pretty familiar for you right now, so the first thing that we're going to do is create an extension. And we're extending team list view controller, and we make sure that we add UI table view delegate and UI table view data source. Open and close curlies. After a period of time, Xcode will think through and it will say, hey, we need to install some methods in here. So if I allow Xcode to go ahead and fix by clicking on the red button here, the very first thing that I want to do is set up to return how many elements I've got in the array, which is going to be expressed through the table view here. So I'm just going to return teams.count. We're eventually going to change that teams variable so that it's a custom class. But for now, just teams.count is going to be fine. And then down here, we will also create a new cell. And we say table view dot, and this is where we do the DQ reusable cell. And we always use the one with identifier and for index path. Our identifier is, remember we typed into the cell, team cell in upper camel case. And our for always uses the index path with lower case letters. And again, that's returned from the call. So when Apple calls and says, hey, I need a new table view, it always passes us in the index path here. After we've set this up, we want to make sure that we do a return cell, and in between our let cell and our return cell, this is actually where we go ahead and configure things. So we're going to say cell dot, and this is going to be whoops, not cells, that's why I'm not getting code completion here. Cell.textLabel.text equals teams, and in parentheses, index path dot row. And with this, everything should be working fine. I need to have a question mark actually after the text label here. It hasn't yet been picked up. So let's allow Xcode to fix that. And now we're still getting some errors here too. We'll be able to try this out in just a bit, but they're associated with the authentication here. And it says that we have an unresolved identifier here for auth, so we need to go ahead and declare that. I'm going to head back over to my code, and we see up here in our code, we actually declare this variable up top. So I'm just going to highlight this code again from my GitHub gist, copy it, Command-C, go back over here, and I'm going to paste that right under my team names. And we're still going to get some errors, and the reason why we're going to get some errors again is because we haven't set up our required methods in an extension. So we're going to go back. I can get rid of these gists that are up here. I don't need them anymore. And as we scroll down, we can see, okay, this is the extension that we've got. And the only thing that needs to change in this extension is the name of the class that we're extending, because we're not going to be extending sports list view controller. So I'm going to click on the gist. I'm going to grab this whole thing, copy it, go back over here and paste it down below. Now again, normally, you just don't want to copy and paste code willy-nilly, but we know, hey, this is going to be the code that we need in order to be able to set up things in Google Cloud Firestore for using Google's authentication login. Now the error that we get here is because we haven't changed the name of the class where we're putting this extension in, and that's going to be Teams List View Controller, so I've just gone ahead and replaced that. And then we've got our table view that's referred to down here, and that error has gone away too, so that's looking great. And now that we've set this all up, as we scroll down, there are a few other things that we need to do. One is we're going to add a view did appear, and then we're also going to add a function called sign in here. And we can actually grab this data, again, right from a gist. And we described how to do all of this code inside of the learning videos for this chapter. So we're just going through things very quickly, and we're using them almost like software Legos. Now those functions that I've just copied from that gist, I'm going to put them in after the last curly brace for the class definition, but before the first extension. So if I go ahead and paste these in here, notice that I've got my view did appear, and actually I like to have my view did appear to show up right after view did load, so I'm going to copy and just push that over there. I also have my sign in function, and I want that to be on top of my IB actions. Again, it's just a sort of standard way of organizing code, so that's a good thing for us to do as well. And we're setting this up, again, we're only using Google authentication in here too, so you'd have to do a little bit more reading and different configuration if you wanted to add, for example, Facebook login, but this is all looking good. Now if we go through the steps, we also are going to add some code inside of sign out pressed. So again, we can go into our gist and grab the code inside of here. I'm actually not going to grab the IB action or the closing curly brace, just the do catch stuff that's inside here. And the reason for that is because we've already created and set up and linked our side out pressed IB action. So this is just the text that we're going to have inside of this. And just as a reminder, what we're doing in here is if the sign out is successful, then go ahead and hide our table view. And what we do is we actually show our table view if the user goes ahead and has properly signed in down here. So there's some code down here. But again, this code is very, very similar to what we describe it in classes, being like a software Lego. We can continue to reuse it. Now, I've also given my students a little logo that we can use for our hackathon as well. You can feel free to use whatever logo you want. This might be a little bit more customization depending on the size of your logo, and if you wanted to do any kind of resizing depending on the size of your interface here. But we're going to do, just to simplify things, is exactly what we've done for Snacktacular, which is to change the background from gray to white, and we're going to put in a standard logo, and the standard logo is actually going to be saved as logo.png. That is going to be inside of our in our assets catalog. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to grab this chunk of code right here, and this is a chunk of code that isn't required, but if you do some use of the Google's built-in UI and you want to customize it, use this. So opening the gist will allow me to grab this chunk of code, copy it, and I can just add this into the extension where I'm working with FUI off delegate. And I'm going to go down below and just paste that in here. Now again, this is all going to work fine if you have a logo which is roughly the same size as a Snacktacular logo, and you also want to make sure that you've named that logo. So we haven't installed that logo yet, so let me go ahead and find my logo. Found my logo, and I pasted that right into my hackathon. In fact, I've blown it up here too, so if you want to copy and paste it right from the video, create your own logo, you're welcome to do that, but just do call it logo in lowercase. And I am going to get into my assets catalog now inside of Xcode and grab this logo and drag it over and let go, and I've installed it. So now if we go back over and see, okay, well, what else do we have to do? As we scroll down in here, we've already set up our app's authentication, so we did that first in the Firebase console, and we should be looking really good in here. I'm going to go over and do a build and run. And again, it usually takes a little time to get everything up and running. Now, what we're going to be doing here when we build and run again is we're just putting in some bogus data for teams, so we need to set up a team class for this. And what this is also going to do is it's just going to allow us to log in and log out using Cloud Firestore. So all of these steps are the steps that you would repeat if you ever have an app which has got, and again, we can ignore a lot of this stuff. This is an error that you'll see happen quite a bit. We'd mentioned this with other APIs too, where sometimes it says no such module installed. You can see that it's continuing to go. It hasn't stopped yet, so we can just ignore this error, and in fact, it should go away as an error if the rest of our code is working fine. We have an app that looks like, as we're seeing right here, we're going to see this kind of behavior where you've got things in a list and you want to have a sign in and a sign out, and you're going to use Google as your sign in. This is going to be wonderful. Feel free to learn on your own too if you want to use Facebook for sign in or anything else. And it does take a while to go ahead and build, especially the first time you build a project using all of these different CocoaPods. Also a ton of warnings that show up, and these are usually associated with the CocoaPods, but they're nothing that we need to deal with or worry about at this point. It would be nice if those were suppressed, and you can actually suppress the warnings with some certain configuration options in here too, but we'll leave them up for now. And we can see that it's actually launching, even though it does say that we've got an error in here. So again, that's just a quirk of this particular version of Xcode with these CocoaPods that I'm using at this particular time. But once it says launching and it's gone through here, there actually is not an error in the app, and it's not going to crash. And hopefully too, as long as things won't run, things will reset and we won't see this particular error showing up anymore. This is just the one that says, hey, you don't have the CocoaPod installed, and it's installed. And here we go. The simulator is up and running. We've launched our app. Again, it takes a little time to start running first. You'll also probably see a bunch of stuff that shows up in your console, but we can ignore that. And this is exactly what we expect. We've got our logo here. We've got our Google sign-in. By the way, if you click on cancel, you can't see anything which is there behind the scenes, so our code does this automatically too. We can go ahead and sign in with Google, and I want to authorize this. And depending on whether you've done this or not, it may or may not allow you to use or ask for you to use an existing account. It actually did have my password saved, but if you've done this for the first time, it's going to ask you for your Google ID, and this is all set up. Now watch what happens if you go ahead and you click on sign out. You can't see any of the data behind the scenes, but a new user can go ahead and sign in if they would like. So we just finished 9.3. These are all the steps that you need in order to be able to set up a Cloud Firestore app that's going to use Google authentication and the pre-built UI. Congratulations. Hope that worked for you.